Meiji is a lucky but poor, pathetic loser who gets a wife from the government when he turns legal. This is because of a law to combat low birth rates that was created 40 years ago. Now, when boys and girls turn legal, they get a notification of who their future spouse will be. Romance with any other partner is strictly forbidden. One day in school, Neji was watching Misaki when his classmate walked up to him and insisted he wasn't going to get married. The whole class was stunned by the numbskull's declaration, so Meiji asked Yusuke what had gotten into him. Yusuke explained that Takeda had seen his notification the day before and was probably scared of having to get it up in front of the in-laws. Takeda insisted that he didn't care about the notice and only wanted to experience falling in love. He then swore on the spot that he wouldn't let the government push him around. The other boys agreed that the marriage rule was like a padlock on a boy's zipper. They all decided they would break the rules and never get married. Suddenly, they noticed Misaki had joined in the vow and Neji almost sharts as he wonders why she's joining the Polygamy Enthusiast Association. The other boys get flustered by her presence and Misaki walks away strangely. As Neji remains starstruck, the boys comment that Misaki hasn't been assigned a plowing tool even though she's legal. The boys wish they'd be lucky enough to plow her farmlands, but they know it's just a pipe dream. Later, Neji goes home and laments how shitty the system is since all he wants is to confess to Misaki. He grabs an eraser from his desk and remembers how he's loved her for 5 years. All the years ago, he had noticed her rubbing her tiny eraser, so he could barely pay attention in class. He eventually offered half of his eraser and Misaki was stunned silent. After accepting it, she whispered her thanks to him, and those 2 words awoke something in him that changed his life, his wood. Unfortunately, that was the last time Neji spoke to her, but he'd never forgotten her smile. Later at dinner, his parents remind him that his birthday is in 2 days, so he might get his notice. All of a sudden, Neji begins to feel all his wanking fantasies slip away and decides that he can't tolerate it. Misaki was the only bug-eyed weirdo for him, so that night, he decided he had to make his move before it was too late. The next morning in school, Neji walked up to Misaki and asked for a minute. Her girlfriends figured it was yet another desperate love confession and left Misaki to it. Neji then introduced himself as the boy from those years ago, but Misaki had replaced that memory with elevator music. Neji suddenly finds himself unable to confess, so he chickens out and apologizes for bothering her. As Misaki walked away, Neji began to accept his fate when he suddenly called out to her and said he'd be waiting for her after school. He then ran off before she could reject him prematurely. After school, Neji waited for Misaki, but she was running late. He began inhaling Misaki-flavored copium to deal with his reality, but it didn't stop time from flying. Hours had passed and Neji's heart was starting to break, so he figured he'd play with sand to distract himself. Once he was done, an officer stopped by to ask what he was doing out at 10:30, so Neji apologized for being a creep and said he'd head home. He took one look at the clock as he resigned to fate and began walking away, but miraculously, Misaki ran up behind him and told him to wait. She apologized for being ridiculously late. Then they proceeded to have an awkward staring competition. Later, Misaki broke the ice by asking if those were burial mounds at the playground, so Neji impulsively began yapping about the history of ancient graves. He couldn't believe his own negative risk, but Misaki laughed and said he hadn't changed one bit. She reminded him of the time he gave a passionate speech about burial mounds, even though no one paid him any attention. Neji then wondered how she knew that if she didn't remember him. That's when Misaki confessed that she lied and apologized. Neji wondered why she would lie when he noticed how beautiful she looked. Compared to her, he was just a matchstick that could talk, but he decided to go for it. He told her he had tried many things to become a man worthy of her, from buying Axe body spray to convincing his parents to enter credit card debt so he could go to the same school as her. Misaki listened patiently as Neji rambled on and eventually summoned the courage to tell her he liked her. Suddenly, Misaki began sweating from her eyes, so Neji apologized for not considering how she might feel and tried to cheer her up. However, Misaki shuts him up, pulls out the other half of the eraser, and reveals that she's liked him all this time too. She explains that back then, she knew he was freaking out about handing over his eraser. This made her happy because Neji worried about her all day, and it made her heart skip a beat. She calls him a nice person for summoning enough courage to help her out and calls him special. Neji thinks he might cry from happiness, so he hugs her.
Yeah, boy.
And reveals he's been stalking her for 5 good years. Misaki gladly hugs him back, and after sharing a moment, she suggests they kiss. She takes the lead and tells him she wants to do all sorts of unholy things to his body, and Neji couldn't agree more. She then goes in for a kiss and things start getting heated until Neji hears his phone ring. He figures it might be his parents wondering where he is, but it turns out to be a notice from the government since he just turned legal. Misaki asks if he'll read it, so Neji begins reading carefully, though his phone seems to be glitching. In the end, he sees he's been matched with Misaki and thanks God for the miracle when his phone suddenly goes off. At that moment, 2 government workers walk up to Neji to deliver his marriage notice. They congratulate him on the news, but when Neji looks inside, he sees a different girl's name. He immediately queries them about the different name he just received, but they assure him it couldn't be possible. They ignore his protest and tell him to contact his future wife, then leave. Neji turns to Misaki and assures her it must be a mistake, but Misaki wishes him a happy birthday and reveals she had never planned to tell him how she feels. She tells him that she'll be able to live off the memory of the short time they had together, but when Neji feels her hands trembling, he calls her out for lying. Misaki takes off crying, so Neji chases after her, and when he catches up, all he can do is hug her. Some days later, Neji and his parents get ushered into an inn for his first meeting with his future wife, but he looks more depressed than Sasuke. When his parents heard the announcement, they were excited to pimp their son out to the government, but Neji had to talk to Misaki one more time. He stuck to school the next day, but they all saw through his disguise. Neji revealed that he bailed on his first meeting thanks to the dumb bow they all made, but the students were all shocked by his stupidity. He ended up in the guidance office, and even the counselor told him he had to leave school since his future was more important than education. Neji couldn't believe it, but he was determined to escape when he heard Misaki call out through the door. She asked him why he came to school, so Neji explained that he meant what he said previously and wanted to talk to her first. Misaki saw it and explained that she only wanted them to keep last night as a memory, and insisted he go meet his new wife. That's how Neji ended up sleepwalking through the inn to meet his future in-laws. The parents exchange pleasantries, though the husband looks like he's at his daughter's funeral. Neji walks into the room to escape and finally comes face to face with his future wife, Ririna. He immediately panics and wonders why the gods would punish him with a girl prettier than Misaki and wonders what to do. Later, the families have a painful lunch together, and Ririna seems shocked at how much of a loser Neji is. Most of the questions come from Neji's parents, while the blockhead sits there sulking in front of a 10/10. Ririna does her best to ignore his attitude and asks him about himself, but when he ignores her, she scolds him for having no manners. Neji is shocked as she hurls more insults, then she states that she wouldn't marry such a waste of and storms out. Ririna's parents apologize for the outburst, but Neji's folks say it was the matchstick's fault and send him out to get her. While Neji looks for her, he hopes she successfully breaks off the engagement, but realizes that maybe he is being rude and thoughtless. Suddenly, he stumbles into a room where he finds Ririna, so she pulls him in, and he ends up landing right above her real estate. Neji apologizes, but when Ririna cries about getting ruined for marriage, Neji reminds her he's the groom. This only makes matters worse as she begins to panic about the thought of marriage. When Neji sees this, he realizes that just like Ririna, he and his friends are just scared. Ririna explains that despite her fear, she sucked it up and tried to cooperate, but Neji screwed it up. At this, Neji bows his head to apologize, so Ririna accepts his apology and promises not to hold it against him. She's glad to find out that his mouth actually works and asks why he was spaced out the entire time. Neji tells her he's liked a girl for so long, but she told him she hated him that morning. When Ririna seems stunned, Neji realizes how dumb it is to tell his future wife about the girl he loves, but Ririna surprisingly wants to know more. Neji told her the entire story, and Ririna was excited by how much it sounded like a TV show. She began asking how much he loved her and if he wanted to marry her. Neji explained that it was more like she made him want to release all his built-up feelings into his pants. Ririna insists on knowing more when Neji spots one of her buttons undone. The idiot doesn't inform her and instead changes the topic. Ririna says Misaki seemed to be asking strangely and suggests she might have been lying to him. She gets excited by the idea of fate and offers to help him figure out how Misaki really feels. They agree to head back, so Neji suggests they hold hands so their parents won't ask any more questions. Ririna agrees, and even though they both turn red, they head back hand in hand to their more than happy parents. However, in poor timing, Neji finally tells Ririna her underwear was playing peekaboo. The next day in school, Yusuke asks Neji why he's going to an all-girls school, so Neji explains that his future wife asked to meet up. Just then, Yusuke asks Misaki if she'd like to look at Neji's future wife too, but Misaki wonders what stunt he's trying to pull here. Later, Neji heads to the girls' school and asks where to find Ririna. The girls call her by a funny nickname and direct him to the nurse's office, where Neji finds her pretty out of it. When she wakes up, she tells Neji to give her some privacy while she gets changed. As he waits, he asks what's up with the lame nickname, causing Ririna to pop out in her underwear, flustered. She demands to know where he heard the nickname, but when she finally calms down, she explains that she spent a lot of time in the hospital when she was little. Since she missed so much of school, she was never quite able to fit in with the girls, which is why she got the nickname. Neji commends her for not faking friendship like the other girls, but when Ririna realizes it's just code for socially awkward, she decks him. After recovering, Neji explained that he was also shit at talking to girls, which was no surprise, but Ririna was surprisingly easy to talk to. Ririna got embarrassed and suggested they head out when she realized he had seen London, France, and indeed her underpants. Later, Ririna asked asked Neji to tell him more about his romance with Misaki when he noticed her walking right in front of her. When Neji showed Ririna who she was, Ririna walked right up to her and introduced herself as Neji's future wife. Before long, the girls were seated at a cafe while Neji eavesdropped on the whole thing. Ririna assured Misaki that matchsticks weren't her type and asked Misaki how she felt about him instead. Surprisingly, Misaki began gushing about Neji, claiming to love even the mop on his head he calls hair. Misaki says she's never had anyone to talk about it with before, and Neji realizes she was as down bad as he was. Eventually, Misaki asks what Ririna feels about him, but she simply says he's nice. Once they're done, Misaki tells Ririna she had a lot of fun and promises to text her later as he leaves. Neji then finds Ririna in tears and asks what's wrong, so she reveals she just made her first friend. She gets so flustered that she wonders if she might be in love with Misaki too. But Neji assures her she's not since she wouldn't want to kiss her. At that, Ririna realizes he and Misaki must have kissed, but instead of being upset, she orders him to kiss her one more time. The next day in school, Yusuke finds Neji sulking on the rooftop and asks if he's already getting a divorce. Neji reveals that Ririna wants him to come to her house, making Yusuke suggest that she wants to get bent over. After Neji denies this, Yusuke praises him for being bold like the day they met at cram school. Back then, some beta male was taking his frustration out on Yusuke because his girlfriend got off to Yusuke's pictures. When Neji saw them, he immediately brought out his phone, causing the bully to confront him. That's when Neji revealed that he hadn't reported to the teacher but called the police. In the present, Yusuke laughs hard at Neji and assures him he can always call the police if he gets stuck inside her. However, Neji's real concern was how despite his love confession and kiss with Misaki, she still wasn't a part of his life. Later, Neji arrives at Ririna's house and she scolds him for being late. Her mom figures she must really be itching to lift her skirt, so she tells the three of them to have fun. Neji is shocked to discover that Misaki is the third wheel while Misaki is just as stunned and offers to go home. Unfortunately, Ririna lacks the ability to read a room and insists that his presence isn't a big deal since they're not even dating. When the tension remains as thick as your ex's thighs, Neji offers to leave instead, but Ririna refuses to let him go. Eventually, Misaki caves and tells Neji to stay, making Ririna happy in the process. Neji wonders if it would really be okay, but as time passes, he realizes who the real third wheel is. Eventually, Neji calls out and alerts the girls of his existence. That's when Ririna insists Neji kiss Misaki. Neji gets weirded out, but Ririna doesn't understand since they'd done it before. The awkwardness gives Misaki a stomachache, so she escapes to the bathroom. While she's gone, Neji scolds Ririna for putting them on the spot, but she insists she's doing it all for them. Just then, Misaki returns with a new determination to pucker up. Neji can't believe his ears, so Misaki asks Ririna if she's really fine with it. Ririna reveals that she's got a watching kink, and when Neji remembers their first conversation, he realizes this is probably some Love Island ripoff to her. On the other hand, Misaki's too thirsty for all this stalling, so she leans forward and is about to plant one on Neji when he suddenly manifests a panic attack. Misaki thinks he's cute for being nervous, but when they look over to Ririna, Misaki notices how sad she looks. After Misaki says she has to leave and asks what she thought about the Love Island teaser trailer, she then tells Ririna she wants her to fall in love with Neji because she doesn't think she's the right girl for him. Ririna insists that she didn't feel anything when they almost kissed, but Misaki doesn't buy it and says she might mind someday. When Ririna returns to the room, she has a mini panic attack, which results in telling Neji to kiss Misaki every day. Later, Ririna walks Neji to the station and asks if something weird happened with Misaki when she left. As they cross, Neji bumps into Yusuke, who's surprised to see that Ririna's V card is still unswiped. Ririna and Neji are stunned silent while Yusuke just walks off like he's on the spectrum. Neji assures Ririna that he's not usually a man of culture, but just a weird emo kid. The next day during PE, Yusuke gets catcalled by some girls nearby, but Yusuke says the girls are just wasting their time since they'll all get their notices anyway. Suddenly, the boys pass by Misaki and her squad, but for some reason, Yusuke and Misaki have a stare down, leaving Neji wondering what he missed. When they arrive at the changing room, Yusuke leaves and Neji can't help but wonder if he and Misaki have secretly been making googly eyes at each other. In truth, he doesn't know much about Yusuke and feels like the Naruto to his Sasuke. Later, Neji heads to class when he finds Misaki practicing how to squat on him. They head to somewhere more private, and Misaki asks if if Ririna said anything when she left. Nijai informs her about the order to kiss every day, and Misaki wonders what is wrong with that girl. Suddenly, they notice a teacher and scramble to hide. In the process, they get dangerously close and Misaki can't help herself from going in for a kiss. They both can't take it anymore and start going for it, French style. However, while they're swapping DNA, Yusuke stumbles on them. Later in class, Neji sees texts from his mom asking him to pick up Ririna on his way home. Just then, Neji notices Yusuke leaving class and tells him he's got something to ask him after school. Neji figures it's the perfect time to tell him something too and agrees to meet him later. After school, Neji waits in class but starts feeling sleepy thanks to the PE period. Yusuke finally arrives for their meeting but finds Neji fast asleep. When Yusuke sees the ridiculous pose he's in, he laughs at how weird Neji is. However, he suddenly realizes they're alone, and when he sees Neji's lips unguarded, he lets his intrusive thoughts win. Later, Neji wakes up from dreamland and is surprised to find Yusuke waiting. He then asks if he likes anyone in their class, specifically Misaki, but Yusuke never gives a straight answer and looks slightly sad instead. On her way out, Yusuke lamented being forced to wait for such a boring question, so Neji tried to make it up by talking about dinner, which cracked Yusuke up. That night, Neji's parents gush over Ririna and Neji's pairing and ask if they've started kissing yet. They reveal that they had intense workouts when they first got paired, making Ririna squeeze out all the salad dressing. She then asks them why they failed to keep their pants on, but Neji's parents state that they simply like each other too much. Neji notices how surprised Ririna looks, but after dinner, Neji's mom tells them to wait inside for the government workers to arrive. Ririna starts heading the wrong way, so Neji grabs her hand and pulls her the right way, but the contact makes Ririna nervous, and she starts rambling to cover up. They arrive at his room, and it looks like something a tornado ran through. Ririna offers to help him clean up the pigsty before it comes alive, so they get to work. Once the extreme makeover is done, Neji realizes he's got a girl in his room and starts to relive one of those pizza delivery fantasies. Unfortunately, Ririna yanks him to reality when she finds their yearbook and asks to look through it. She's excited to see how cute Misaki was when she was a kid. Then she notices a picture of a camping trip and mocks how Neji's hair looks like an old man's mustache. Regardless, Neji cherished the picture because it was the closest he had to a picture with Misaki. At that, Ririna asks when Neji realized he was in love with Misaki. Her question catches him off guard, but he realizes it wasn't actually the day he gave her the eraser. It was the next day when he saw her and noticed the world had more sunshine and rainbows. Ririna wondered if he wanted to kiss her back then, but Neji said he just felt really happy for the first time in his life. Ririna gets excited by his love tale, so Neji asks if she has a similar story, even if it wasn't exactly love. Ririna then recalls a time when she was still in the hospital, but she was lonely cause her parents could only visit in the afternoon. A young resident there used to take her on walks and show her a child anatomy model who apparently got separated from his mother and is said to cry every night from loneliness. Ririna instantly felt like it was just like her, so every time she passed by it, her heart would beat faster. When she wondered if it was love, Neji told her she wasn't right in the end, and she was just spooked by a ghost story. On the topic of kissing, Ririna asked Neji if he had been following her orders to kiss Misaki. Neji gets put on the spot and admits to doing it, so Ririna looks within and decides it doesn't bother her. Ririna asks if Misaki was happy about it, but Neji says his mouth was too busy to deliver a survey. However, when Ririna sees how happy Neji is, she starts looking mad. Neji tries to apologize for upsetting her, but she insists she's not and ends up slipping on top of him. At that moment, Neji's mom announces that the government workers have arrived for an interview. Neji and Ririna sit awkwardly apart, so the government lady asks if they interrupted something naughty. When they get nervous, she assures them it's normal and tells them more about the strings of science. Up until they turn legal, they are given a series of surveys and tests that go into determining their partners. Unlike arranged marriages, their methods are more precise and barely any of their matches fail. The lady adds that the system doesn't take physical appearance into consideration and asks the kids what they think about each other. She starts with Neji, so he says his feelings haven't caught up with the notice yet. On the other hand, Ririna insists that the data they use to determine the matches should be made public, but the woman quickly brushes it off and says they seem very compatible. She then informs them that other people who are matched early start developing plot within a month, so she encourages them to get busy. Neji turns red at the thought, but Ririna assures him it's not happening. As the workers leave, they ask where Misaki's house is, so Neji points them in the right direction, while Ririna asks if she's gotten her notice. The workers refuse to answer, claiming it's private information, and head on their way. Ririna then notices Neji panicking at the possibility that Misaki might have been assigned a plowing tool. Ririna tells him to pull himself together if he really loves her, but when Neji remains hopeless, she gets disappointed in him. Neji snaps out of it and thanks her for talking some sense into him, but Ririna says says she's doing it for Misaki. Neji's mom pops out and invites Ririna on a camping trip with them, saying she should ask her mother. Later, as Neji sees Ririna off, she tells him to ask Misaki about her notice and kiss her. Neji says he won't be kissing her anymore, cause it's weird to do it, just because Ririna said so. The next day, Neji has several opportunities to talk to Misaki, but he can't bring himself to do it. During their last period, the teacher announces that he needs someone to help Misaki fold pamphlets after school, so Neji agrees to help. After school, Neji carries a box to class when he notices Misaki and Yusuke having an intense conversation and wonders what it's about. Later, Misaki meets up with Neji, and they start working on their task together. Neji loses focus and notices how smooth her skin is but manages to snap out of it and ask about the ministry visit. Misaki confirms that they showed up, but when Neji thinks she's been assigned a boy toy, she explains that wasn't the case. She never reveals why they came and changes the topic to ask what they asked him and Ririna. Neji tells her what happened, so Misaki says she thinks they're a good match and are kind of like. Neji agrees but explains that he was heartbroken when he thought the ministry had delivered her notice. Misaki then says that regardless of a notice, the only person that would ever be special to her is Neji. With this, they both share their third kiss. Afterward, Misaki meets with her friend Shu, who tells her she's always been a liar. Misaki agrees but insists that she's never been able to lie to her heart. That night, Neji gets a call from Ririna, who asks about the update on Misaki. When she learns that Misaki didn't receive her notice, she tells Neji that she invited Misaki to join them while camping. Neji gets freaked out and decides to invite a friend too. Unfortunately, Yusuke isn't the least bit interested when he asks him. Neji does his best to convince him, and after enough nagging, Yusuke agrees to do it. However, when Neji feels relieved that he doesn't need to deal with the girls alone, Yusuke's eyes fill with regret. Meanwhile, Misaki feels nervous about the camping trip and wishes it was all a lie. Some days later, Neji waits at the train station for the others. He spots Yusuke first, but wonders why he seems kind of mad. Yusuke then walks up to him and warns him he'll be making trouble for himself by taking him along. However, before Neji can ask what he means, the girls run into them. Misaki looks stunned to see Yusuke, while Ririna immediately calls him out for being a closeted creep. Though Ririna is right about the closeted part, Neji tries to calm her down. Misaki and Yusuke talk privately, and Neji notices the tension between them. Later on the train, the group sits silently till Ririna points out how painfully awkward they are. Regardless, she says she's glad to have gotten her notice since she gets to be friends with Misaki now. While the girls talk, Neji asks Yusuke what he and Misaki were talking about earlier, but when Yusuke says it was nothing important, Neji figures he must like Misaki. Later, they arrive at the camp and the moms ask Neji and Yusuke to get started on dinner while they clean out the cabins. Neji thinks Yusuke is the type of guy who knows how to work some oil, but he's yet to discover it's a different kind of oil. Yusuke ends up being shit at cooking, so Neji sends him off to wash the vegetables. Unfortunately, his mind is blown when Yusuke asks which soap to use. Despite Yusuke's uselessness, they manage to whip up a dinner that makes the mothers fall in love with Yusuke. Neji goes off to call the girls for lunch when he spots them playing around in their bathing suits. His wood gets extra heavy, so he crouches down behind a rock while he watches. The girls catch him peeping and ask him to join them. Neji tries to tell them about lunch, but when Ririna struggles to hear him, she tries to move closer and ends up twisting her ankle. Since she can't walk, Neji offers to carry her, but she insists she doesn't want her legs wrapped around him like a hoe. With no choice, Neji carries her in a princess pose and asks Misaki to help bring her things along. As Neji carries her back, he fights against the intrusive thoughts, telling him to move his hand upward. At the same time, Ririna is discovering the joys of being touched for the first time and struggles to keep it together. When they reach camp, she forgets about her twisted ankle and storms off angrily. Meanwhile, as Misaki watches their lovers spat, Yusuke walks up and asks if she's got a pain-loving kink, but Misaki says it's complicated since Ririna was so happy to have her. As they talk, Neji notices them and is bothered by how much Misaki laughs around Yusuke. Later, Ririna's dad helps treat her ankle and Neji gushes about how professional he is since he's a veterinarian. On that note, Ririna's dad asks Neji what he wants to do when he gets older, so Neji says he'd like to do something related to ancient burial mounds. When her dad asks why, Neji explains that since the mounds existed in a time before written language, he finds it cool that they have no idea why the people buried in them were important, and likes to wonder about it. Riri's dad is glad to see Neji is passionate about something, while Ririna sees a new side of him. That night, the fathers are passed out on the floor while Neji and Yusuke talk. Neji assumes that Yusuke is in love with Misaki and is only being considerate of him, so he moves closer to confront him. Yusuke gets flustered by how close he is, but Neji doesn't back down and asks him what he's hiding. Yusuke remembers the Snow White moment and starts to talk when they suddenly hear Ririna calling for them outside. They head out to join the girls, and Ririna suggests they split up and go hiking, leaving Neji and Misaki alone. When she and Yusuke walk off, she tells him to stay a meter behind him, so Yusuke feels sorry for what Neji's future is going to be. Ririna insists that Neji will be fine and starts listing all the great qualities about Neji, which surprises Yusuke. Despite all the talk about Neji, she switches up and wonders how Neji and Misaki would react to being alone in the forest together. When Yusuke confronts her about shoving them together, she insists they're in love, but he warns her that she has no idea what she's doing. Meanwhile, Neji and Misaki get past the awkwardness and Misaki says she's having fun. She points out how Ririna already seems like part of his family, but since Neji doesn't hear her, she changes the topic and asks if he wants to hold hands. They walk hand in hand till Misaki notices something glowing and suggests they follow it to see what it is. However, Misaki loses her step and falls off a cliff, so Neji follows after her. Thankfully, they didn't fall far, but Neji notices all of Misaki's buttons are now undone. Misaki is simply glad to be alive, so she pulls Neji in close to her and asks for them to stay like that for a while. Meanwhile, Yusuke asks Ririna where she intends to fit in Neji and Misaki's relationship. When she tries to answer, he interrupts and reminds her that if Neji chooses Misaki, their arrangement will be terminated. He asks if she can really stay friends with them once they're married while she gets married to a complete stranger. He then adds that if Neji rejects his arrangement, she'll be fine, but Neji will have to pay a penalty. Ririna insists that the arrangements are just matchmaking, but Yusuke reveals that Neji would no longer be able to fulfill his dreams since schools will turn down applicants, starting with ones who rejected their match. Ririna starts to panic, as she insists she only wants them to be happy, but Yusuke says it's just a fairy tale. Just then, they notice something glowing and decide to follow it too. There, Ririna finds Neji and Misaki in baby-making position, though Neji insists it's not what it looks like. Ririna and Yusuke climb down to meet them, and they all look for a way back to the trail while Neji promises Yusuke he didn't stick his tool in. They suddenly notice the glowing light from earlier and find a shit ton of fireflies. Everyone is stunned by the scene except Yusuke, who's scared of bugs, so Neji teases him while Ririna seems sad. Ririna catches Misaki and Neji admiring the fireflies, so she holds both of their hands while looking down. Neji then grabs Yusuke's hand to go with the flow, but Yusuke gets embarrassed. 2 days later, the trip is done and they return to the train station. Misaki is the first to leave and Yusuke is about to follow when Neji asks for a word in private. He apologizes for forcing Yusuke on the trip with him, but Yusuke simply says he's sorry too and walks off. Neji then returns to Ririna, and as they walk home, she asks about burial mounds, which get Neji excited to show them to her. Ririna gets flustered, and Neji realizes she must worry about him, so he thanks her for the concern. Some days later, Neji and Ririna start getting down and sweaty when Ririna wakes up and wonders why she's dreaming about that when she's never been kissed. The next day, she heads to the library to do more research on kissing, when a girl in glasses called Orisa notices her and tries to call out to her. It takes a while, but the girl finally gets her attention. They head to the notice board, and Ririna discovers Orisa is the second top scorer after her. However, when Orisa calls her by her nickname, Ririna storms off, so Orisa apologizes and asks what she should call her. When Ririna asks why it's necessary, Orisa says she wants to be friends. Afterward, Orisa tells her she's the younger sister of the intern who used to look after Ririna. Her brother had told her about the brave little girl who never cried even without her parents, so Orisa asked to be friends with her. Ririna bluntly tells her she has nothing to talk about with her, so Orisa calls it a shame since she's really easy to talk to. This reminds Ririna of what Neji said, so when Orisa tries to leave, Ririna stops her and asks how to be friends. Orisa is surprised that Ririna has only one other friend, so Ririna confesses there's someone else that's kind of important to her. Meanwhile, Neji was busy moping over Misaki again because she had been avoiding him since the trip. The guidance counselor then told Neji and Takeda they had to leave school early to attend a special class by the ministry. As the boys got ready to leave, they bumped into Yusuke, who'd been skipping classes again. When Neji tells him about the special class at the ministry, Yusuke remembers hearing about it from a man and looks horrified. However, he pretends not to know much and walks away, though he's clearly devastated. Later, Neji arrives at the ministry and notices Shu, a girl he once went to school with. When he enters the building, he finds Takeda loved up with his assigned wife. She introduces herself to Neji and talks about her interest, making Neji realize she's too good for Takeda's ape. Takeda asks where Neji's assigned wife is and gets excited to meet her, but Neji can't help but feel weirded out by all the arranged couples in the building. Just then, Ririna shows up and Neji is stunned to see her with her hair down, so he tells her how cute she looks. Ririna then hands him a keychain of rare armor, causing Neji to freak out and thank her for it. In return, Neji hands her a lousy cat keychain he thought she might like, and Ririna surprisingly promises to treasure it. Takeda's wife praises the arrangement systems and says they obviously like each other. Then she heads in with Takeda, while Neji and Ririna remain embarrassed. Ririna immediately tells Neji how wrong that girl was and insists that she hasn't once thought of kissing Neji or dreamt about him. Neji wonders what the hell she's on about, but before he can ask, she runs off and he figures she probably wants to fall in love with someone who loves her back. Meanwhile, Shu works in an office observing the participants and suggests the event is in poor taste. The government lady claims they're simply providing help to those who request it and walks away while Shu wonders what Neji will end up doing. Later, the participants gather in a classroom where the government lady talks more about their assigned partners. Neji is surprised that they were dragged there for such a boring lecture, until the government starts talking about the art of plowing unexplored farmlands. They start passing a basket around, and it turns out to be free rubber covers. Surprisingly, Ririna doesn't know what they are, so Neji pretends not to know too, while he wonders what the heck is happening. The government lady asks them if they have fun with their partners, so Ririna says she does, but Neji doesn't get a chance to answer before the government lady says the art of making babies is also fun. Most of the students go red in the face, and Neji realizes this is technically how they increase the birth rate. The government lady continues to lay down the facts and Ririna is surprisingly locked in. They all look up when the lady assures them it feels good to get nailed by someone they love, but Ririna thinks such a motivation makes them no better than monkeys. The lady says that even girls with little confidence don't need to worry since they selected their partners to fit like Cinderella and her glass slippers. As if that excruciating lecture wasn't enough, the lady turns on a special movie for a practical demonstration. To Neji's surprise, he'd already seen this movie last week on Pornhub, but he couldn't believe the ministry would show it for free. Neji starts to think of Misaki, so he tries to snap out of it and see how Ririna is doing. Ririna's mind also wanders to an unholy place, so she grabs her cat keychain to protect her from panty-shifting demons. Neji wonders how everyone else is reacting and can't believe Takeda and his babe are about to get down and right in the middle of class. Suddenly, that white-haired government man shows up and wonders who he will choose, the girl he's always loved or the one he's been assigned. Neji wonders what he's talking about, so the man leaves him to it, but warns him they'll be watching in the other room. Once the V-card shredding tutorial is over, the woman announces that they'll be spending the night with their partners as a sort of take-home assignment. Some of the participants start speculating that there could be a penalty for not getting laid, and Neji remembers what that white-haired said. Moments later, Ririna and Neji find themselves in a room alone, but Ririna's brain cells refuse to process what's supposed to happen now. On the other hand, Neji's single brain cell works overtime to figure out what to do. He realizes this also affects Ririna and wonders what he can do for her. He suddenly pushes her down and climbs on top of her while fighting the trouser demon banging to get out. He figures they only need to pretend to develop plot and remembers that the Pornhub video started with some kissing. Neji takes the fact that Ririna isn't resisting as a green flag to go on, so he plants the first kiss on her. When she doesn't kick him in the berries, he goes in for another round and gets some tongue action going. However, when he pulls away, he sees Ririna in tears and realizes what he's done. Moments later, Ririna asks why he would do such a thing, so Neji says he was told they'd be watched and penalized if they didn't successfully bump bellies. Ririna calls and says the government wouldn't get away with something so heinous, so whoever told him was taking him for a ride. She then states that even if it were true, he should have looked up the word consent first. The awkwardness continues as Ririna asks Neji if he ever thought of tongue wrestling with her before. Neji says he never planned for it to go this way and apologizes, but Ririna says she feels like something's wrong with her. When Neji tries to check on her, Ririna jerks back and says she's scared to have him touch her. Neji backed away remorsefully as Ririna said it would be best if they kept their distance for a while. When the demonstration was over, Ririna left sadly. Later, Neji bumped into Motoi and scolded him for lying to him. Motoi asked if he ended up unlocking Ririna's floodgates, and when Neji told him what happened, Motoi was sure he would have done it with Misaki. The man then tells Neji to think about it and walks away. Summer vacation rolls by and Neji tries to reach out to Ririna, but she doesn't reply to any of his texts. Even his little sister wonders where Ririna is, and when Neji says she might never come over again, she throws a baby tantrum. Later, Neji heads to school convinced that he's the type of fool to buy a pot without an opening. Inside the classroom, he finds Yusuke and Misaki reading some lines, but Yusuke is being difficult. Some guys tell Neji that they're practicing a gender-swapped Romeo and Juliet, but Yusuke can't seem to look Neji in the eyes. It turns out that their teacher was blackmailing Yusuke with his poor attendance. Neji realizes Misaki would be wearing a man's outfit, so he grabs his phone to tell Ririna till he remembers his situation. Later, he and his classmates are making props for the stage when Neji spaces out and drops his rare armor keychain. When he tries to reach for it, he accidentally gets hammered. After a while, Misaki asks what happened, so her friend fills her in. Upon hearing this, she rushes to the infirmary, though she needs a second to calm down before she talks to him. Once she successfully switches on that elevator music, she calmly asks Neji if he's okay. Neji wonders what that was about, so she explains that she might have damaged her Riz cred if she didn't calm down first. Then she asks how he got hurt. Misaki asks if something happened, so Neji whispers that he got what he deserved, then changes the subject to how they hadn't spoken since the camping trip. Misaki reveals that she basically banned herself from being around him because it's not fair to Ririna. However, she insists that she doesn't want him hurt and begs him to drink some milk next time. Neji promises to, but when Misaki sees he's still acting weird, she gets closer and asks him to look her in the eye and tell her what's wrong. Neji confesses that he hurt Ririna's feelings, so Misaki wonders if she had something to do with it, but he assures her it was just him and his holeless pot. However, he assures her he'll return to normal and not space out anymore. Later, Misaki and Ririna go out together, and Misaki treats her to some hotcakes. Ririna wonders how hotcakes are different from pancakes, which brings up an old memory for Misaki. Ririna asks what it is, so Misaki says one time in school, Neji managed to make the prettiest hotcakes in class. He made them every day because he was getting a little sister soon. Misaki smiles at his and says she would have loved to eat some of his hotcakes. She then mentions how down Neji has been lately and asks Ririna if she knows why. Ririna says she hasn't spoken to him in a while, but she feels so lonely without him. She then wonders if it's the heat frying her brain cells. Some days later, Neji walks through the hallway when he overhears a teacher addressing an alumni. It turns out to be Motoi, and though he tries to run for it, Neji asks to speak with him. They head outside and Neji tells him the situation with the girls, explaining that he just wants to apologize to Ririna. Motoi calls Neji's innocence blinding and offers to tell him of a similar case he once had. There was a guy who had a girlfriend he'd been dating for some years. When she got her notice, she asked her boyfriend to marry her so she could reject the notice, but the boy was too scared of marriage, so they broke up instead. Unfortunately, after he got his own match, he realized how precious his ex was to him. Motoi says in hindsight, there was only one correct option and he should have been true to his own feelings. He claims it was just a story he heard and encourages Neji not to think too much and just act. At this, Neji runs off, deciding to lean into his feelings for Ririna. He heads to the roof and sends a text asking her if she still wants to check out burial mounds with him, since she's the only one who takes him seriously. Unfortunately, he was aired. Meanwhile, Motoi returns to the ministry, where his colleague asks him if anything has changed at their old school. Motoi tries to answer but can't help, but think things would be easier if he could throw away his feelings for her. Some days later, Neji still didn't get any text from Ririna, but when he went downstairs, he found a letter from her. She encouraged him to remain sincere about his passion so people would listen, and hope they could see the burial mounds one day too. She then encourages him to prepare well for the cultural festival, which brings tears of joy to his eyes as he runs off with new determination. Meanwhile, Misaki practices her part, but she can't stop thinking of what Ririna said. She knew Ririna was in love, but she couldn't bring herself to tell her. She was no longer satisfied with just watching Neji, and if she said something they might realize they were in love. She concluded that it was a cruel thing to be in love. Later, Neji finally started helping out with the cultural festival, and everyone wondered what had suddenly gotten into him. On his way downstairs, Misaki asked about his hand, so Neji said he was better, and explained that he had finally heard from Ririna too, but he still had to apologize. Misaki assured him everything would be fine and walked away, but everything wasn't fine with her. Later, Misaki practiced her lines as Romeo, where she insisted that a life without her lover was not one worth living. Neji was stunned by how convincing she sounded, but the others told him to snap out of it and asked if he knew where Yusuke was. Neji later finds Yusuke reading in a classroom and informs him that the drama team is looking for him. Just then, a girl announces that the costume designs are up and asks them to check it out, but when Yusuke sees the dress, he storms out. Neji runs after him, but Yusuke insists that he's not doing the play anymore as he didn't want to embarrass himself like that. Neji had told him to do it for him and the rest of the class, but Yusuke assured him he had no idea how he felt. Yusuke told him he was being insensitive, but he was unsure if it was because of his missing brain cells. When he tried to walk away, Neji reached for him, but Yusuke smacked his hand away. Just then, a man appeared from nowhere and asked what was going on. Yusuke ran for it, but the man cut him off and it turned out to be Yusuke's dad. Later, they all sat down over sushi and Neji officially introduced himself. Yusuke's dad handed the boys food and asked Yusuke if he wanted his parfait first, but Yusuke passionately explained that parfaits should be eaten last out of respect. His dad brought up the issue of him hitting Neji, so Neji tried to take the blame, but Yusuke apologized regardless. Neji then assured him that he could hit him more if he liked, and Yusuke's dad began to crack up. He then told Neji that Yusuke used to play for the football team and was very popular when he was younger, unlike his emo-ass self now. Neji informs him that Yusuke was starring in a school play, which surprised his dad since Yusuke never spoke about school. Annoyed, Yusuke excused himself from the table and left for the bathroom. His dad then told Neji that it was pretty amazing that his son was able to open up to him and asked him to take care of Yusuke for him. When Yusuke returns, he finds his parfait waiting and turns redder than a fire truck. Afterward, the boys walk home alone and Neji asks if he's really not gonna play Juliet. Yusuke says he hates being the center of attention, but Neji thinks he's the best of the role. Yusuke insists that the story is also about two idiots who didn't care about anyone but themselves and ended up dying for it. Neji can't argue with that summary and begins to wonder if there was something they were willing to give their lives to protect. Neji remembers Motoi's advice about being true to his feelings, so he tells Neji that Romeo and Juliet are just like them since they have partners chosen for them regardless of who they love. He then points out that the fact that everyone knows the story of Romeo and Juliet means that even if they don't end up with their love, it's not meaningless. Lastly, Neji points out how old the story is and somehow veers off into his love for burial mounds, which reminds Yusuke to get going. Neji asks if he's still not doing it, so Yusuke agrees to do it, since Neji went this far. When Neji rejoices, Yusuke asks why he cares that much, so Neji says he just feels like Yusuke accepts him. Yusuke manages to smile at this, but when Neji points it out, he denies having a heart. Later, Neji writes a letter to Ririna, inviting her to the play. Meanwhile, Misaki gets measured for her outfit. When they measure her bust, the girls freak out about how huge they are, while all the boys experience a trouser tightening epidemic. Next for measurement is Yusuke, but suddenly, all the girls turn into fashion experts and want to get in on his session. Once they get rid of the excess estrogen, the director says Yusuke will need some chest padding, and all the boys pity the poor. Eventually, school term resumed and Ririna sent Neji a historical postcard, though he was strictly obsessed with burial mounds. Preparations for the cultural festival also continued, and the school was bubbling with excitement. Once the flyers for the play were printed, Neji offered to take them downstairs, but on his way, some of them ended up spilling. Misaki helped grab them off the floor and offered to help, so they headed to the committee room together. Misaki told him about the preparations for the play, so Neji pointed out that she seemed to be pushing herself too hard. Misaki is surprised that he caught on, so she confesses that even though she's in a lead role, she's not excited. She's just doing it so she doesn't inconvenience the others. She then practices a line from the play and wishes she could be honest about her own feelings too. She asks if Ririna's coming, so Neji says he sent her tickets, making her sad. They continued talking about the play, and she says she was told to kiss Yusuke. Neji's heart almost explodes, but Misaki says they both passed on the idea. Neji asks what she thinks of Yusuke, so she says she's surprised he's taking the play seriously. She then stops and asks if he's fallen in love with Ririna. Neji says she's the one he loves, but when he thinks of Ririna, he wonders what love is anyway. Misaki uses her experiences to describe what love means to her. Unfortunately, it sounds an awful lot like simp behavior with a touch of stalking. She then tells him that 6 months ago, she thought their love was a miracle because she hoped they'd end up in the same school, and they did. It only got better when the person she loved her back and they shared their first kiss. She could have suffocated on happiness. However, the waterworks begin when she laments not getting picked as his assigned wife. She mentions how perfect Ririna is for Neji and says she doesn't even know if he loves her anymore, even though she loves him more than she ever did before, and it's been 5 years. Hearing this, Neji hugs her tight, and though Misaki tries to protest, he refuses to let go. As she cries, she also wonders what love is. The day of the cultural festival arrives and Neji tries to hand out flyers, though everyone ignores him like that Borderlands movie. Just then, he notices everyone gawking over how pretty Misaki looks in her Romeo costume. As he stared at her, he remembered the ending of their last conversation. Misaki had told him to forget about everything she said. She remembered how cute Ririna was the last time they had lunch together and explained that she didn't want to see her stat, which is why he had to erase his memory. In the present, Neji realized that Misaki had probably been faking a smile all this while and felt bad. Suddenly, a girl walked up to Misaki and Neji recognized her as a Karen he once went to school with. Back then, she gave him hell for screwing up his tasks, and she has hated him ever since. Neji figures the best thing is to creep away before she notices him and starts moving. Meanwhile, Shu and another classmate join up with Misaki, and Shu points out Neji trying to sneak away. The Karen instantly remembers him as the slacker from years ago and starts boiling with anger. Niji manages to get away successfully, but he surprisingly runs into Motoi. Niji wonders if Motoi is some type of school kids-watching creep, but Motoi insists that he's there for work. He then brings up a certain matter. The last time they spoke, Niji had told him that Minaki was the first name that appeared on his notice, but Motoi suggests he might have read it wrongly. Niji still holds out hope, but Motoi informs him that the notices are first made in paper form before they send the data to the people who deliver cell phone notices. However, he promises to look into it as an apology for deceiving him at the lecture. In the present, Motoi says that Ririna really is his assigned wife, but there's evidence that someone interfered with the notification service on his phone. Niji wonders if someone sent the fake notice on purpose, but Motoi points out that it could have been a system error too. He then asks Niji if he already made up with Ririna since he saw her outside. Meanwhile, Ririna arrives at the school gate with Orisa, who teases her about getting nervous. Ririna asks Orisa if it was really okay for her to skip drama club since she's the vice president, but Orisa brags about her vice president perks and says she wanted to get a peek at Ririna's assigned husband. Ririna quickly lowers her expectations since he's pretty ordinary. At the same time, Neji worries that Ririna might still be mad at him, but since he can't figure out what he should do, he focuses on simply passing out the flyer instead. Ironically, Ririna ends up right in front of him, and they both start freaking out. Niji notices how beautiful Ririna looks and wonders where the heck he'd been looking this whole time. Orisa wonders what's up, so Ririna asks for directions to the drama club's booth. Like clockwork, Niji tells her and hands over a flyer, while Ririna runs upstairs. Niji then returns to feeling like trash. After a while of failing to hand out a single flyer, he hears an announcement that the play will soon begin and notices Yusuke walking past. Niji runs up to him and asks if he could attend his costume fitting with him. Yusuke tells him he'd murder him if he came along, so Niji laughs at how much Yusuke hasn't changed. Yusuke asks him what happened since he's acting weirder than usual. Niji reveals that Ririna came to the festival, but since he made her angry during summer vacation, they hadn't talked much. He finally bumped into her, but it was awkward, so he's not sure if she's still mad at him. Yusuke tells the idiot that he doesn't think Ririna would have come all this way to be mad at him and walks off. After, Niji heads to the classroom and tries to make himself useful, but when he gets directed to the Karen in charge, he figures he's better looking to help elsewhere. He then offers to help another student carry a box backstage, but when he carries it upside down, all the contents fall out. The student politely gets rid of Neji, so he walks off and notices Misaki looking sad. He tries to go to her, but gets blocked by another student and misses his chance. He then looks around at how busy and useful everyone else seems to be and wonders what he contributed to the festival. The director tells the useful students to move backstage if they're ready, so Neji waits behind. A student calls out to Yusuke, who's still dressing up, so Neji asks if he's nervous. When Yusuke says he is, Neji says he can relate even though that empty box had more of a purpose than him. Niji laments feeling like he didn't accomplish anything, but Yusuke reminds him that the festival isn't over and they all feel that way. He then admits that it was Niji who got him to do this, and he has actually had fun. Niji is moved by how Yusuke credits him for his participation and tells him not to have any regrets. Then, Yusuke pulls back the curtain to reveal his outfit and tells Niji that he'll prove love wasn't meaningless after all. Niji can't form a coherent thought when he sees how pretty Yusuke looks, so Yusuke gets embarrassed and storms off. He tells him to take responsibility and make sure to watch the play. The play is finally about to begin, and thankfully, Takeda saves Neji a seat. Misaki appears on stage looking depressed, but she sees Neji mouth some encouragement from his seat and snaps out of it. She and Yusuke put on a convincing performance, and Neji's jaw remains open and loose. Ririna is also moved by their performance, and as Misaki recites her lines of not wanting to live without her love, it strikes a chord within Neji. Yusuke manages to play an emo princess quite well, and they pull off the infamous death scene without a hitch. The play ends with Romeo and Juliet in each other's arms, and the audience goes crazy. Yusuke is happy to see Neji out of his funk as he cheers excitedly. Afterward, Neji decides to find Misaki and tell her how he feels, but he's stopped by Shu, who calls out to him. Neji tells her he's got somewhere to be when she suddenly asks what happened to the notice pairing him and Misaki. At that moment, Ririna was walking nearby and overheard the two of them talking. She wondered who the girl was but listened as Shu asked Neji what he thought of Misaki as Romeo. When he described how passionate she sounded, Shu explained that Misaki had been giving herself over to love, and she was his true destined partner. Upon hearing this, Ririna asked what the hell she meant. Marissa asks if it's true that Neji got a notice assigning him to Misaki, but Shu and Neji are too stunned to speak. Shu tries to remove herself from the equation, but when Riorina demands to know what's going on, Shu reveals that Misaki has a secret she wants to protect, so she intends to protect Misaki too. As Shu leaves, she bumps into Motoi, but she ignores his existence. Meanwhile, Riorina questions Neji about the situation, so Neji explains they didn't mean to hide it from her, because he thought he just read it wrong. Riorina asks if the notice pairing them was a mistake, so Neji gets embarrassed and clarifies that Motoi said Riorina is his assigned wife. Neji then realized he hadn't apologized before talking to her, but Riorina tells him it's fine, since they have other things to worry about. Riorina says they need to get the full story out of Shu, so Neji suggests they get her contact information from Misaki. At that moment, Orisa runs up and asks what Riorina is doing with Flyer Boy. Riorina introduces him as her assigned husband, but Orisa is let down by his vanilla existence. Afterward, they head to the classroom and Misaki is excited to see Riorina, who tells her how amazing the play was. Neji joins in the praise and tells her she was glowing like a different person, and adds how pretty she was. Before Neji can ask about Shu's contact, Yusuke walks up and scolds Neji for abandoning him. Suddenly, Riorina clocks that Juliet was a guy and starts gawking all over him till Misaki breaks the news that it's just Yusuke. Her heart breaks and she asks Yusuke if the costume was part of his kink, but Yusuke insists he doesn't roll that way. Moments later, Yusuke's older brother appears with his dad and almost laughs his soul out. Yusuke follows in Sasuke's steps and tries to off his brother, but he calms down when his dad tells him he did a good job. His dad then turns to Neji and thanks him for taking Yusuke camping, so in return, he asks if Neji would like to attend a wedding. Yusuke is stopped from interrupting, while his dad tells Neji he can bring some of his friends too. Yusuke's brother tells the girls about the wedding and tells Yusuke he can come as Juliet to the ceremony. That evening, Neji tells Riorina he wasn't able to get Shu's contact information, and Riorina says she was also too distracted by Orisa to get it. Neji assures her they'll get it the next day and thanks her for coming to the play. The next day, Neji successfully gets her number, but he struggles to type up the perfect message. He finally settles on a message and gets blocked in the end.
Emotional damage.
Meanwhile, Riorina gets approached by other girls in her class. She later tells Orisa how weird it is that people suddenly want to talk to her, so Orisa reveals that she's changed lately. She used to be the Grinch who stole Christmas, and even Orisa wouldn't want to talk to the Grinch. Suddenly, Riorina gets a text and rushes over to find Neji drowning his sorrow in burial mounds. Neji begins wondering what he could do to make a person hate him, when all he does is love burial mounds. When Riorina recognizes the one he's making, his eyes light up, but Rarisa forces him to focus on the issue at hand. Neji wonders what he could have done to piss her off in school, so Riorina says she'll try messaging her instead. Neji warns her that it's hopeless since he got rejected, but Riorina instantly gets a request to meet, and is even allowed to bring Neji along. Neji thanks her for coming out to meet him, but Riorina tells him to stop sounding so formal. The next day, they head to Shu's school when Rarisa notices something. She shows Neji an article about the notice system, and he realizes the person who invented the notices has the same surname as Shu. Shu meets with them, and after an awkward 3 seconds, Riorina asks what she meant the other day. Shu suggests they head to a more suitable place to talk, so they end up at a cat cafe. The girls start petting the cats, so Neji breaks the ice by telling Shu that she must have accidentally blocked him, but Shu casually says it was on purpose. Riorina gets down to business and asks if she's rooting for Misaki to get with Neji too, but Shu says not at all. She says she simply wants to protect Misaki and asks why Riorina said too when she's Neji's assigned wife. Riorina admits that she wanted to cheer them on after she first heard their love story, so Shu wonders what she could possibly gain by matching them. She scolds her for being selfish and says she's hurting Misaki. Neji asks why she called Misaki his destined partner if she's not rooting for them, but Shu says they have a bond beyond the notices. Shu said she used to dislike Misaki because her smile seemed shallow, and she never let anyone know what she was thinking. However, one day she caught Misaki looking at pictures from the other class, and wondered why she wanted to buy some. When she looked through the pictures, she saw Neji was in all of them, and asked if Misaki liked him. Misaki told her to keep a secret, so Shu offered to help her buy the pictures. Misaki thanked her happily, and that was the first time she saw the real Misaki. From then she noticed Misaki kept going to their class, and doing things just to see Neji. One day she asked what Misaki saw in someone as plain as Greek yogurt, but Misaki said she didn't need others to understand how she felt. However, she wanted his assigned wife to know all his great qualities and love him for it. Shu asked her what she would do if she was his assigned wife, and Misaki said she'd cry. In the present, Shu said love must be powerful to make someone shine so brightly, even if it's for a pathetic background character like Neji. Ririna asks what her connection is to the person who invented the notices, so Shu says it's her grandmother. According to her, the notice pairs you with the person you're fated to love, and every other love would seem like a lie. Ririna asks what Shu's opinion on the notices are, but Shu says she doesn't know but only wants to protect Misaki because she shines so brightly. At that moment, Motoi appears and asks Shu what her objective is. He reminds her that the calculations for choosing Ririna for Neji are absolutely correct, and tells her she's mixing the love she saw from Misaki with the one from the notices. Shu finally agreed and said she shouldn't have said these things to someone who had no intention of choosing Misaki anyway. When she storms off, Motoi tells them that she's a genius who's supposed to take over the matching system when she's older, but it doesn't mean she can match people as she sees fit. Afterward, Neji and Ririna leave, and Ririna asks him if he intends to pick Misaki. Neji said he didn't know, but he grabbed her hand to keep going while Ririna held it tightly. Some days later, the gang heads for Yusuke's brother's wedding, and Neji wonders why Yusuke is just attending like the rest of them. Yusuke says he's just relieved that he's getting married because his parents really believe in the notice system, so at least one of them had to do it. All the talk of assigned wives makes Neji look at Ririna and wonder if he's actually in love with her. He remembers that Misaki is the one he's loved for the longest time, but now Shu says she's hiding a secret, so he wonders what she could be lying about. Just then, a woman approaches them and asks if they're assigned couples. Yusuke points out Neji and Ririna, so the woman explains that she needs models for their wedding pamphlet. Ririna informs her that they're still in school, but the woman says it's perfect since their targets are students who get married in school. Neji freaks out over the idea of the girls in wedding dresses, but when Ririna asks Misaki what she thinks, Misaki suggests they try it out. They agree to do it, so the woman says they'll reach out with the details and hands them a form to fill. She then says her partner is free to watch the shoot as well. After they all attend the wedding reception, which brightens up once the bride and groom arrive. Everyone cheers for them, and a man from the ministry begins to give a speech about them. As the man starts a slideshow of where their story began, Neji wonders if they'd do the same for him and Ririna. Suddenly, he realizes that his time with Misaki would be like it never existed if he married Ririna, and feels sad. Meanwhile, Misaki tells Ririna how much she seems to be sparkling. Ririna then informed her that other students in her class had begun talking to her, and Orisa said she was now easier to approach. She then says it's all because of Misaki and Neji. When Ririna thanks her, Misaki says she's glad to be friends too and hopes they can be friends forever. She asks Ririna to invite her to her wedding, hoping to see her as sparkling and happy as the bride. After the celebration, they all head outside to take pictures with the happy couple. Afterward, the planner says they'll be tossing the bouquet next and asks the guest to change locations. Neji suddenly realizes he left his phone on the table inside, so he rushes back to get it. When he returns to the hall, he finds his phone right where it should be, but then he notices Misaki's slump on the floor. Neji asks what's wrong with her, so she claims the ceremony simply made her emotional. However, when Neji gets closer, he realizes it's a lie, but she apologizes since she can't tell him the truth. Neji asks what he can do to make her feel better, and insists he'll do whatever it takes. Meanwhile, Ririna wonders what's taking Neji so long and leaves the bouquet throwing to search for him. Back in the hall, Misaki tells Neji to say he loves her even if it's a lie. At that moment, Neji pulls her in for a kiss and Misaki cries as she kisses him back while Rarisa watches. Rarisa steps back and runs away while Misaki tells Neji she was unfair to him and promises she's fine now. Later, when Neji headed home with Ririna, he felt incredibly guilty. Even though Misaki was closer to him than in the days he spent stalking her, she never felt further away. That night, he wonders what he can do for Misaki and hopes he didn't hurt her needlessly. The next morning, Neji's mom wakes him up to go to the hot springs. It turns out his mom and Ririna's mom had planned a family trip to the hot springs. Neji tries to ask Ririna if she knew about it, but Ririna looks like she's in a trance. Neji's dad then grabs his bag and tells Neji to escort Ririna around town. They head off together, and when Ririna almost trips on a stone, Neji catches her and they both get embarrassed. However, Ririna remembers the scene of him kissing Misaki and decides to get her mind off it. They begin to enjoy their tour around the town, but Neji gets burnt by a hot bun and uses some ice cream to cool off. When Ririna laughs at him, he points out how much more she laughs since they met. Ririna says Misaki said the same thing and things become awkward again. When they return to the hotel, Neji's mom hands over a key to their room, which shocks them. Ririna wonders where this is supposed to lead, so Neji promises to be on his best behavior. Unlike that last time, Ririna tells him that she's pretty much over what happened the last time and suggests they just enjoy the hot springs together. They have dinner with the rest of the family and have lots of fun. Then, Ririna's mom tells Neji to try the hot spring later. She says it's been lots of fun coming here with his family and thanks him for honoring their invitation. Afterward, Neji heads to the hot spring and is surprised by by how luxurious it is. He hops in and begins to soak away his sorrows when he hears Ririna at the other side. He tries to make small talk with her, but when that dies out, Ririna asks what he thinks about the Shu's idea of destined love. She asks if he believes in fate, but Neji says he doesn't know what to think. He's only going to his current school because of Misaki. He switched up his dressing for her too, so in some sense, she was like the goddess directing his fate. Ririna then realizes that everything Neji is because of Misaki. Suddenly the dads enter the hot springs too, and Ririna's dad tells him it's almost like he has a son. Later that night, Neji struggles to sleep when Ririna suddenly asks if they can talk. Neji asks if he should turn on the lights, but Ririna insists she would be too embarrassed to talk if he did. Neji tries to fill the awkward silence by rambling about how fun the hot springs trip was and even suggests inviting the others next time like the camping trip. Ririna then interrupts and tells him to choose Misaki over her. Neji asks what she means, so she explains that she can't remember what she did with her life before the notice came, but then she met Neji and made friends with Misaki and everything changed. She would now go to bed thinking of the fun things they did together and spend other days noticing interesting things to tell them when next they met. Along the way, she managed to make new friends in school, and it was almost like a magic spell. Ririna says that Neji and Misaki's love changed her and believes that they should be given a chance to love each other. She admits that it'll hurt a bit, but says they gave her enough to balance it out. According to some research she did, there's one way to get out of a match peacefully. They just have to keep lying to their ministry person that they don't get along. They'd probably be interviewed and counseled, and it might even take 6 months, but if they keep up the lie, it wouldn't be a black mark against Neji. They wouldn't be forced to go through a match again, so Misaki can do the same thing with her arranged marriage, and they can end up together. Neji says it'll be hard for him to pretend that he hates her for 6 months, and outrightly says he doesn't want to. He then wonders what's gotten into him as he starts crying. Ririna asks if he's in love with Misaki or not, so Neji says he is, but as she tries to remind him why he should be with her, she starts crying too. Neji admits that he loves everything about Misaki, and Ririna insists that she loves her too. Neji asks if Ririna is really okay with this and wonders what will happen to them, so Ririna says that even if they're not matched, she'll always be on his side. She remembers Misaki's smile and how it made her want to experience love too, so she wants her to smile like that again. With that, they both agree to go ahead with the plan. However, Ririna brings up what Shu said about Neji never planning to choose Misaki, but she tells Neji to protect Misaki freely and thanks him. Neji tells her she's glad she was his assigned wife and comes clean about kissing Misaki at the wedding. Ririna claims it doesn't bother her, but Neji insists that it felt wrong not to tell her. Ririna remembers her own kiss with Neji and wonders if she should say anything when she notices Neji looking gloomy. She then says that she'll get herself matched with someone else after him and plans to fall in love with him. However, she says she doesn't want to screw up holding hands or kissing and asks if she can practice on Neji.
I don't blame you. Damn good deal.
Neji agrees if she thinks he's good enough, so they both get ready to practice. Ririna gets nervous and closes her eyes, so Neji does the honor of planting one on her again. When they pull away, Ririna claims she'll need more than one to practice and asks if she can kiss him instead. Neji agrees and waits for her to come to him, but when he sees her vibrating like a spoiled washing machine, he does the honors again. This time, they introduce the tongue wrestling rematch, and things get more than a little bit heated. Neji wondered what love was if it wasn't this, but they both decided to ignore their feelings. Even though they were miserable, there was someone else they both wanted to protect. Afterward, they sat together, hands locked, and stared at how beautiful the moon was. 1 week later, Ririna met with Misaki for their wedding shoot, but before they left, Ririna said she had something to say. Meanwhile, Neji's mom wondered why Neji wasn't going to cheer Ririna on when the doorbell rang. It turned out to be Yusuke, and when he went up to Neji's room, he told him he had a thank you gift from the wedding. He then asks why Neji isn't going to the bridal shoot, so Neji said he might have told a lie. He began rambling about agreeing to Ririna's plan, but Yusuke has no idea what he's talking about. Neji asks Yusuke if he ever told a lie, so Yusuke says yes, but changes the subject to why Neji lied. Neji said he did something inappropriate which would hurt Misaki, but he also shouldn't have agreed to Ririna's plan. When Yusuke asks why he agreed, Neji finally admits that he loves Ririna, but he says he loves both of them. Neji feels bad and doesn't think an idiot like him should go around breaking hearts, so Yusuke asks him why he puts himself down. Neji says he's as boring as watching grass grow, and Yusuke actually agrees. However, he tells him that if someone hurts because they love him, that's not his fault. Yusuke explains that that's what it means to fall in love, so Niji doesn't have to be fair. He just needs to acknowledge both of them. Yusuke tells them to be true to his feelings and go to them, so Niji runs out of the house and thanks him. However, Yusuke himself looks sad since he can't take his own advice. Meanwhile, the girls prepare for the bridal shoot, and Ririna asks why Misaki thinks it's impossible for them to dissolve their match. Misaki says she can't tell her or Niji why. Ririna assures her she's willing to support her no matter what, but Misaki simply says she's happy that Ririna is Neji's assigned wife and can take care of him. Ririna calls her out on lying and Misaki admits it, but she says to protect their love, she'll make a lie the truth. The stylist calls Misaki to look at her dress, and when she leaves, Ririna confesses she's also a liar. Meanwhile, Neji runs to the bridal shoot as he finally clears his mind and accepts that he's in love with both girls. He knows it's selfish and doesn't care if they're both mad at him, but he decides to see them both. Back at the church, the girls try and pose for pictures, but the photographers tell them they're both stiff and suggest they picture the guy they love. Suddenly, the doors fly open and Neji comes in and tells them they both look pretty. Misaki starts crying and Ririna tells her she's a liar. When the manager asks to get a picture with the assigned couple, Ririna suggests all three of them take a picture instead. Niji joins the girls, and they all pose together happily. Are you Team Ririna, Misaki, or all of the above? If you made it this far, confuse the fake fans by commenting RIP Yusuke. And if you like anime recaps like this, watch this video here.